Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Superhero Pantheon. Before we get to our normal episode, we are going to be answering some burning questions about Spider-Man Far From Home. We are not going to be doing a full review of the movie due to the fact that there are two other podcasts here on the Real World Podcasting Network that will be discussing this film in some depth. So if you are looking forward to that, you can go elsewhere. We will probably come back to this movie at some point so we can determine whether it goes in the Pantheon, at the Pile of Shame, or somewhere in between. But for right now, I just want to give everybody a spoiler warning for this, as we are going to be discussing everything involving Spider-Man, including everything that comes in the middle of the credits and after the credits as well. So you have been warned. After we play this clip from the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, Brian will be asking some burning questions about the movie.
Everywhere I go, I see his face. I just really miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too. I don't think Tony would have done what he did if he didn't know that you were going to be here after he was gone.
You gonna be the next Iron Man now?
Well, no, I don't have time. I'm too busy doing your jobs.
Oh.
I'm kidding. Look, keep up the good work.
Because I am going on vacation.
So yeah, I was the first person to see it between the two of us. I actually went to the midnight show, which was cool because I haven't been to a midnight show in forever. It's usually the 7 p.m. shows, but as you know, this movie came out on a Tuesday, which is really cool and convenient for me, which is one of my off days now. So I got to see it Monday night. Hardly any kids. I think there was like one or two kids. So it was nice and refreshing, and a lot of hardcore marks in the crowd, a lot of cheering and stuff. So, it's pretty fun to watch, fun experience. It's not a home run. It's very clunky at times, and, I do have some problems with Jake Gyllenhaal's performance about midway through when it kind of goes over the top a bit, and he's, in the bar talking with his crew and kind of going over the plan, like, excessively. And although it was cool to see all the connections between all the past movies, even going back as far as Iron Man 1 with that weird scientist guy, still kind of crazy to put that all together, but still, it's just like, you're doing the trope of exposing your plan and blah, blah, blah. So it does have its issues, but it's a lot of fun, and it's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be, it's supposed to be kind of like this thing that kind of like take you down a peg from Avengers, because this was this high note that they were coming off of. So it's still a lot of fun, and we'll see where it goes from here, because I don't know if he's going to finish high school or not.
I don't know if he's going to finish high school. I still think they're going to weasel the way around this twist in some way. I certainly think for the shock value, I think it works. The big mid-credit sequence that everybody's going to be talking about. I actually think the final credit sequence is going to ultimately be the one that is more important as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I just want to echo your thoughts. I thought this movie was very clunky at times. I think if I were to evaluate this movie just on the criteria, I could very easily see giving a 7 or 8 to the heroes and villains score, because I really like the performances of almost everybody involved here. I think Tom Holland kills it as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Again, there is no doubt in my mind that he is the best Spider-Man to have ever donned the costume in the live-action versions of this character. I really like just about everybody else. I think Zendaya is going to be, if not already a huge star, between this and Euphoria and some of the other things that she has in the hopper, so to speak. We're going to be hearing a lot about Zendaya, and I almost hope that at some point she gets to don a costume and be a superhero of her own, because she is by far one of the best performers in this movie. And I think the kids did a really solid job. The actress who plays Betty Brant who was in The Nice Guys. It's great that she was back. I think I really loved the opening of this movie when they had Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You, playing it over an in memoriam over Iron Man, Captain America, and Black Widow, which I guess this raises the question. I guess Captain America is theoretically dead, or the understanding is that he is dead. I'm very curious to see where they go in that direction, if that's actually true or not. But I think the movie, it really tries to balance, again, this idea of being a teen comedy versus incorporating all of the Avengers type stuff, and I do not think it is altogether successful. I think it's very clunky, and I think it was really obvious that Mysterio was going to be bad, and that when he was, they really tried to lay it on thick that he wasn't, and I almost wonder if their logic was, well, everybody thought the scrolls were going to be bad, and we twisted them, and we really kind of messed audiences up with that, so we're going to try to get away with it again. And it just didn't work. Like, it was so incredibly obvious that he was going to be evil, especially when they were talking about him literally joining the Avengers, and I'm like, there is no way that Jake Gyllenhaal is coming back for 10 Marvel movies. There's just no way, and it was really obvious, and I was just kind of waiting, and even the stuff with Nick Fury, I wasn't totally surprised by. I'm a little bit more willing to forgive because they're very clearly telling a more cosmic story moving forward. So I'm more forgiving of that. But like I said, I think the moments in this movie that work are the ones where it's Peter Parker talking with people, whether it's the villains or whether it's the heroes. But every time the plot moves forward, it was a real struggle. And Brian, did you know that Tony Stark died? Because after watching this movie, it wasn't quite clear to me.
Yeah, and the audience was kind of shocked. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, come on. That beginning, I swear to God, I was laughing my ass off like the whole time, and I know the audience was laughing too, but I think I was laughing harder than anyone because I don't know. I guess because me and my friend were having a conversation about an hour earlier, talking about Whitney Houston. Something about Zendaya making a connection with her. I can't remember, but it was just so funny. We were talking about Whitney Houston an hour before that, and that popped up. So it was just like one of those things. But yeah, I think they balanced the comedy well. Like, I think the strength of it is the comedy, and yeah, Peter talking and him at the end when he, he on the ship, and then he's doing the thing that Tony does. So that was pretty cool. And the stuff with Tony's glasses. I'm glad a lot of the fake spoilers that were going around were kind of wrong, even though it kind of raised my expectations maybe a little too much. But that's just kind of on me. So I raised the expectations a little too high for myself. But I think we're good from there because we're not going to do a full breakdown like Jerome said. But I think it's time for the 5 burning questions. I came up with them because I was the first one to watch it. So I came up with these late last night. So bear with me. Number 1, Jerome, are you disappointed the restaurant scene with the cops was cut from the film?
This movie was over 2 hours, and it really started to dawn on me in the third act that this movie was running really long. I think this is definitely a film that could have benefited from having even more cut. I don't know specifically what you would have cut, but man, there were some sequences in this movie that there was a very whiplash-like feeling going across my mind as I was watching what was going on. So I cannot say that I am totally disappointed. I think it's a really funny line. I think it works in the context of the trailer itself, but we already have seen the payoff, so I don't think there's really a reason to see the scene, especially if it doesn't have anything to do with the plot.
I get you. I just really wanted more of that Iron Spider suit, and that was clearly part of that scene, and that's what I really wanted to see more of, but they really cut back a bit on it, and then now Spider-Man has all these different suits just like Iron Man, so that's kind of this new aspect that we never really got with Spider-Man, so that's kind of really cool what they're doing with the suits. Number 2, will there actually be a multiverse?
I think there is going to be a multiverse. I liked the idea of them kind of doing a false start with this. I think the timing actually really worked out because they already did introduce a multiverse in a Spider-Man movie. So I think it kind of worked as a fake out. I do think there is eventually going to be some sort of a multiverse. They've even talked about this with Captain America. I know that the Russo brothers have mentioned the possibility of telling more Captain America stories in the universe that he has branched off into. So I definitely think there is going to be some multiverse elements introduced at one point, but I am now not sure that we are going to get it in the MCU movies themselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I felt like they were kind of dipping their toes in the water kind of like thing. You know what I mean? Like kind of testing it out to see how the audience would react to that. If it's too much for them, if it's, too crazy for them. I think they were willing to accept it because all these theories came out afterward about the multiverse and this is how you're going to introduce the X-Men and blah, 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 the Fantastic Four. And of course, knowing this is a Mysterio movie, we should have seen this coming, that it's all fake. Even the parallel universe stuff or the parallel Earth stuff, that it was all fake. But we should have seen that coming, I think. But it's definitely a tease for it. I'm willing to accept it, and I want it to happen because that's a big thing in the comics. I mean, they're even doing it on TV now with the DC TV show, so I think it's kind of relevant, and the audience can accept that because I think what's coming with the DC shows actually is they're going to merge a bunch of the Earths together because that's what happens in the comics on Crisis on Infinite Earth. So I think that's what's coming there. Number 3, how big was your pop for J.K. Simmons coming back as J. Jonah Jameson?
It was pretty enormous because it was literally perfect to have him come back in that role, and it is very clear that the Daily Bugle, its role has changed from something that is kind of a credible news site into being kind of one of these right-wing hacky websites. It would not surprise me if they're going directly at the New York Post with this, and I think it works out perfectly. I'm not sure of the twist overall and the impact that it is going to have. It certainly was very shocking in the moment, but I think some of the there's just a plausibility problem with Spider-Man suddenly turning evil and apparently killing Mysterio. So I don't buy it. I will be very curious to see if other movies address this or what's happening. But J.K. Simmons himself got a big pop from me.
Me too, and I think like at least half the audience knew what was going on because they recognized. I think they were popping for Jameson, but half the audience was kind of shouting or chanting even louder because they realized it was him coming back, and we're just kind of marks for that. So I was huge into that. I was looking at my buddy, I just had this smile on my face, and we were just like glowing. And the idea that he's the Alex Jones of the MCU universe now as Jameson, kind of reinventing the role for the modern era. It's a great idea, I think, because it's a great take on it, and that's very, very modern and very current. So, number 4, will Peter Parker get to finish high school? It's taken him at least 7 years at this point, and with the big reveal at the end, revealing to the world that he is Spider-Man, how in the hell is he going to finish high school now?
They revealed that he is Spider-Man, but that does not necessarily mean it is going to completely take. I'm not sure, again, with this twist, I'm not sure if that's the direction they're going to go into, but I absolutely think that he is going to graduate high school, and I think there's going to be a lot of symbolism with him graduating into being an adult. I absolutely think that is what is going to happen, because if they don't have him in high school in the third movie, it defeats the purpose of this franchise, because the whole essence of this franchise has been dealing with a younger Peter Parker in high school with his friends, with his compatriots. I mean, to me, the best aspects of the first 2 movies are when he's interacting with Ned or Flash or Betsy or MJ. It really doesn't work if you don't have these characters in these Spider-Man movies. So they are going to have to find a way to keep him in high school. And my guess is they already know what they're doing, but I have to believe that if they go in another direction and they remove him from high school, I don't think the third movie is going to work.
See, the reason I bring this up because famously Harry Potter number 7 kind of went way out of its way and took him out of the school, and he never actually graduated Hogwarts technically. But yeah, I just kind of thought of that. I don't know if they're going to go with the Harry Potter route on that, but it made me think like the dude's been in high school for not only the snap with the 5 years, plus the 2 years he was in high school before that. And they also mentioned that the kids that were snapped had to retake the year because of the timing of everything, and the teachers didn't want to go back and get the grades from 5 years ago. So I thought that was kind of fucked up that they had to go through another year of high school on top of that. So number 5, how long has Fury been on vacation in real life?
My logical take on this is based off of what happened with Thanos, that there came a decision where Nick Fury decided that he had to go, possibly with Captain Marvel, into space and build up the defenses of other universes and other places. My guess is that after Tony Stark's funeral, Nick Fury made the decision to leave Earth, and that's how you got things with Ben Mendelsohn's character and the other Skrull. And I think that's how it worked, that Nick Fury left after the funeral of Tony Stark, shortly thereafter.
That's kind of what I got the feeling of too. And I almost thought like maybe that wasn't even him at the funeral, but come on, that had to have been him. And you're right. I think that makes sense. And I think that it's weird that on like the second or third viewing of Avengers Endgame, I could have sworn I saw Middleston in the high school sequence when they're all coming back to high school and you see Peter and Ned hugging. I could have sworn I'd seen them in the background, and I keep seeing him in the background. I don't know if it's actually him, but the fact that he actually shows up in Spider-Man at the end of the end credit sequence kind of made me kind of pop for that. And I don't know if they did it on purpose or accidental or what, but it really got my subconscious going thinking about that. So I thought that was a cool connection that unintentionally happened. So that's kind of our takes on the movie. We're probably going to review it again in about a year's time, given its legacy and all that kind of thing, and see where the franchise is going. And I kind of wanted to mention that the big fake end credit scene that's been going around with the whole Avengers Tower becoming Oscorp thing. I thought that was so cool, but it didn't happen. But I'm glad it didn't happen, because I guess that would have been too predictable maybe. But who knows where they're going now, even though we kind of want that Sinister Six movie to kind of happen, but we'll see if it happens in, I don't know if they're going to call it Spider-Man Graduation or whatnot, but that'd be kind of cool. And if they could actually incorporate some of Kanye West's music from the Graduation album from 2007, which is one of my favorite albums, that'd be dope as well.
All right, so without any further ado, let's get to our actual regular episode. The Pile of Shame was made for movies like this. Yes, folks, it's time for Batman and Robin.
A world at risk.
Batman will watch his beloved Gotham perish.
Just what I had in mind. Everything dead on Earth except us.
Yes.
Girl of my dreams.
Come join me. Forget the geriatric bat.
A partnership.
Robin, no!
In crisis.
You were reckless, and you almost got killed by Freeze tonight. All you could think about was poison ivy.
How are we supposed to work together if you won't trust me?
A family in conflict.
Then I go after Freeze and Ivy alone.
She loves me and not you, and it's driving you crazy.
One kiss.
She wants to kill you, Dick. It's my rules that keep us alive, and you will abide by them.
You must learn to trust him, for that is the nature of family.
This is the Superhero Pantheon on the podcast. We take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the Pile of Shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through The Real World. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so in one of 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, let me tell you, this is the movie that I have been dreading all these months. This is the movie where we are going to decide whether our first Batman movie is going to go into the Pile of Shame. Let's see what happens.
I don't remember this movie being so bad, but then watching it recently, it's worse than I remembered. And I'm going to have some hot takes, and I know some of you, people who are George Clooney fans might get mad at me, but I'm going to have some hot takes, and it's not going to be pretty.
All right, let's just get right into it. Just like last week, we're going to get right into the categories and just talk about the heroes because, of course, there is a brand new Batman once again as we have George Clooney taking over for Val Kilmer. And I think people don't understand what it was like at this time. George Clooney was a television star, and that's what he was. He was on ER at the time. He was not this big-time celebrity, and I think it might be tough for our younger listeners to process that. And I don't know if George Clooney could have made any sort of a significant difference as it relates to this movie because I really don't know whether his performance makes much of a difference either way. And it's funny because George Clooney even says, I think we just killed the series. He has apparently been known to refund people who saw this film. I would love to know if that's actually true. He talks about hating it. It's been rumored that he also, one of the things that he does say, though, is that he doesn't regret doing it because he gives it credit for making him a leading man in Hollywood, as he had previously just been a TV actor, and he still keeps a poster of the film in this home office as a warning to himself, which I think is genuinely amazing and probably keeps him just a little bit humble. But just to give everybody some perspective, at this point, this was just the second Batman movie in which the actor playing the villain was billed over the actor playing Batman. And in 1989, it was Jack Nicholson, who I think you can make a really solid argument for, playing the Joker. He is a Hollywood legend. But again, I think for our younger listeners, it might be tough for them to understand that Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1997 was a significantly bigger star than anyone else in this movie by a wide margin. And we can get into some of the logistics of that in just a minute here. But let's focus our attack, so to speak, on George Clooney.
Yeah, I like him in From Dusk Till Dawn, and you're right. He wasn't even a big movie star up until this point. I think this probably put him on the map as a big movie star, and then I think after this was probably what? Perfect Storm? And then, after that, Ocean's 11, and then from there, his career kind of took off to its full potential, right? In this movie, it doesn't matter. Like, I think he's such a bad Bruce Wayne. I think he's not even that good of a Batman. And I know people are going to hate me for saying that because people love George Clooney Batman for some reason, but it just feels like he's reading lines and not trying and not giving anything to the role. Like, it just feels like he's just not caring. Like, it doesn't even seem like he's brooding or like thinking deeply. It just seems like he's just there to collect a paycheck, and it ruins it for me. And this is the worst Batman for me personally. It's clear to me now. I didn't realize it until I watched this movie again that this is the worst Batman and the worst Bruce Wayne, and I'm going to stick to my guns on that one. And it's boring. He's not that good. He doesn't even have good hair in this one.
That was quite the rant. It takes a lot to make Brian mad. Brian tends to be the more generous of the two of us when it comes to this, so he's really fired up. And I feel like my comment is almost going to seem like a compliment compared to his. I think George Clooney is marginally better, and I want to emphasize and underline that word marginally because I think George Clooney is actually charismatic. And I don't think Val Kilmer is very charismatic, and I think that's why he's better. I also think George Clooney has a little bit better delivery of some of his lines, and I will get to one specifically that I think, unironically, I think there is actually a really good message to the movie at the end, and Brian is probably infuriated by this fact, but I think it's actually good. And otherwise, I don't think he's a good Batman. I don't think the action scenes work at all. We did not talk about bat nipples last week. I don't really want to talk about them this week because they are almost a non-factor. They do not make George Clooney into a bad actor. They don't make Chris O'Donnell into a bad actor. I think Chris O'Donnell is significantly worse in this movie. I didn't like him in Batman Forever. I like him even less here. And I think so much of that is because there's all this conflict with Batman. They are obsessed with it. And it's really, really annoying. And Chris O'Donnell, in keeping up with the parade of people just burying this movie, he says it just felt like everything got a little soft the second time. On Batman Forever, I felt like it was making a movie. The second time, I felt like it was making a kid's toy commercial, which there are multiple suits and multiple vehicles, so that is totally understandable. He also complained about the Robin costume, saying it was more involved and uncomfortable than the one that he wore in Batman Forever, with a glued-on mask which caused sweat to pool on his face. So Chris O'Donnell did not have a fun experience, and if it wasn't for the NCIS television show that he's been a part of for about 200 episodes, we may never have heard from Chris O'Donnell again, because if you look at his IMDb page after this movie, it is pretty dire.
Yeah, it sucks because like I enjoyed like part of his performance in Batman Forever. Here, it's just like you can tell he's doing this cartoonish shtick, and it's a completely different tone than he had in the previous movie, and it really bothered me this time around. And the fact that he's been dumber, and I felt like he was a smarter character than he in Batman Forever, and now he's doing this thing where he's like easily fooled by Poison Ivy, and I guess that's the joke, right? That men are easily manipulated with beauty and blah blah blah. But it just seems like it was too much for him. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like he's a lot smarter than that, or at least this version of Robin. And the way they portrayed him just made him look like an idiot throughout the whole movie, and kind of saying some sexist stuff to Batgirl at the end as well.
All right, we have to talk about Alicia Silverstone because she was arguably a huge star at this point, coming off of the movie Clueless. She was brought on to play Batgirl in the hopes that young women would come to see Batman and Robin in theaters. She was a teenager at the time, and there was a lot of body shaming going on the set and in public. This is probably some of the worst stuff that we are going to talk about. And another reason why this movie absolutely belongs in the pile of shame. There's a cruel joke done by one of the storyboard editors. At the time, it was rumored that the young actress was having trouble fitting into the tiny Batgirl costume, and the story editor says this: I heard she was in the costume department being cinched into a corset to fit into what they were going to do to the costume, so I did a cartoon of what I thought she looked like. I did it as a movie poster, Clueless 2, the casting of Batgirl. It was a private joke, just the guys in the art department. The joke drawing got out, but Beauregard got to keep his job because he luckily never signed it. I can only imagine what would happen to this person now. Or what I would hope for him is that he would get fired and never work in the industry again, because this is awful. And what happened to Alicia Silverstone on this movie is a disgrace. And I'm not saying that she was any good in this movie, but nobody was good in this movie. And it just seems like what Alicia Silverstone had to go through was so much worse, because after some of these rumors and some of this stuff started coming out, and some of the rumors about her gaining weight, because heaven forbid you're a woman and you gain weight in Hollywood, there was some slamming by even the media. They were getting in on this and mocked the actress for being too fat to fit into her costume. Director Joel Schumaker publicly defended Silverstone during interviews and press meetings, joking, what this girl's big on, that she ate some pizza. When the taunting continued, Schumacher lashed out at the reporters that taunted her. He said in a magazine interview, it was horrible. I thought it was very cruel. She was just a teenager. Like all of us do at certain times, she did gain some weight. I would confront female journalists and I'd say, with so many young people suffering from anorexia and bulimia, why are you crucifying this girl? So I just want to say that Joel Schumacher, not my favorite director, not my favorite person, but good for him for stepping up when he did. I think there are times when directors step out against the media, and I think it's BS, but this is the one time where I think he is absolutely correct. And almost aside from everything else, this movie being so bad, I think this is just a really bad representation of everything that is wrong with Hollywood, because Alicia Silverstone did not deserve this. And I think even the way that she's written to be kind of this very try-hard person, and the performance is off. She was not the right person for this role.
Yeah, and I'm a big Clueless fan, and I love her in that movie, and it just feels like after this, her career was just like completely gone after this, and I can kind of see why something like this probably scarred her psyche, and like her experience going through that with the media and everything with this bullshit. And I vaguely remember stuff like this, but as a kid, you kind of like don't even think much of it. But looking back now in the history and this whole body shaming bullshit, it's just like, it's horrible. And like, it's no wonder that she probably got, probably it soured her, her idea of what Hollywood can do to a person, and probably kind of, picked lesser roles because of that, and kind of like had a lesser career because of that. But I hate to say it's just because of that, but this does not help. But at least it seems like Joel Schumacher is a decent human being, despite his, what we don't like about his directing style. But it sucks. But I mean, I think actually her performance is pretty decent in this movie for what it was. Like, I think she's better than George Clooney and better than Chris O'Donnell, that's for sure. And like, I think Clueless is like this movie that, can stand the test of time, almost kind of thing, in terms of like all-time comedies. I feel like it's almost timeless and kind of speaks to every generation. So I think she'll have like this, that's kind of her legacy. This kind of like taints it a lot, and it sucks, but at the same time, she did, I think, her best. And there's all these little like small allusions to like the '60s Batgirl and calling her Barbara. Not necessarily Barbara Gordon, which she should be, but just calling her Barbara. That was a nice little touch. So they tried a little bit, and it just feels like because of the inexperience and not having a good script, that it didn't execute well, and that's why that the performance seems kind of off a bit, but it's better than what I expected.
So Alfred actually gets a bit more to do because he's dying of this McGregor syndrome, and this is something that comes up. And I think he is essentially the focus of the plot. And I think in a better movie, I think this plot actually works out even better, because I think there was a lot of pathos to it. And I don't mind that Barbara was Alfred's niece instead of Commissioner Gordon's daughter. If you look at the context of the movies, Commissioner Gordon is a nothing character. And Alfred isn't much of a character either, but at least he is much more closely intertwined with Batman. So I did not have a problem with Batgirl being changed. And like I said, I think if you're doing this and you capture the essence of the character, then I have zero problem with it. So, and in a way, her becoming Batgirl and being able to get the suit and some of the vehicles, I think it makes more sense if she is related to Alfred based on the context of these movies. So I don't really have a problem with that. I do like some of the Alfred stuff. But the problem is, because everything else is just not good, I still have to give this a 2.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I liked about the movies, the Alfred subplot, and they gave him so much more to do. And Alfred's got the best performance in the movie by far. Like he's trying, he's caring. He actually seems like he's got general emotion in this movie. So credit to him. I'm gonna go with a two. I would have gone with a one originally, but I just liked the little aspects of the Alfred stuff that I wanted to bring back, and they kind of brought back, sort of like in Dark Knight Rises. I feel they kind of touched on that whole relationship. That like I love the idea that he's this like father figure, and they really don't touch that or touch into that. Like in this movie, they do, and then of course in the Dark Knight trilogy. So I like that they kind of planted that seed and they kind of went with it more later on.
Let's talk about the villains, and we of course have to talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was cast as Mr. Freeze. Originally, there were some considerations, including Ed Harris, which would have been very different. Patrick Stewart, also very different. Anthony Hopkins, very different. I do think it's funny the two of those people went on to Westworld. I think the person that most intrigues me is actually Patrick Stewart, because for a lot of different reasons, I think he captures the look of the animated Mr. Freeze so well. Again, just coming down to the bald head. I think when people think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't even know what they think of at this point, because he's done a lot in the last 20 years, not even related to movies. I think people much more associate him with being the Governator and being in the bad Terminator sequels and all that stuff. But again, there was a time when he was one of the highest paid movie stars of all time. And I think in those movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger could do his shtick, he could do the one-liners, and it works because of the context of those movies. It does not work here. He is literally saying one-liners the whole time. The delivery is bad. The direction is bad. And there is nothing to this Freeze character. Again, there is potential here with who Mr. Freeze is and the fact that his wife and the tragedy that is associated with that. But what they do is they really reduce it down to being a cartoon character with the one-liners. The scene where he is with Vivica A. Fox and his minions, that is legitimately, I think, the worst scene that I've ever seen in one of these Batman movies. Ever. Period. Because he's also smoking a cigar, which is hilarious. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger is a disaster in this movie.
Listen, it's fine. You can cast him as Mr. Freeze. That's fine. Like I picture him as like a Mr. Freeze type when I heard him. It's like, oh, that seems like a Mr. Freeze because he's got that accent, right? And he's got like the physicality of being a villain. So the problem is just the too many one-liners and all that bullshit and the stuff about him being obsessed with Christmas cartoons. What the hell? Like that, you don't need to like bang it over the head so much. You know what I mean? Just we get it. Like he's it's ice and freezing and all that shit. You just don't have to bang us over the head with it so many times with all these stupid jokes. It's too much. Just take it back. Go. It's better when he's looking at his wife and then you stare at his eyes. Like that's kind of the best part of the Mr. Freeze stuff. You just look at his eyes because I feel like at least you see what Arnold's trying to go for in this performance. Like deep down, underneath all that ice, he still like cares for his wife, and that's the main goal. You know what I mean? That's what I love about the Mr. Freeze character is him having this eternal love for his wife and blah blah blah, and it's tragic, and you sympathize with him. Here they try to do that like right off the bat once they introduce the wife, but the problem is it's too cheesy and shitty that you don't know what's going on. Like you can still have Arnold Schwarzenegger play this role. He can be a good actor. We know he can. Like I like him in Total Recall a lot. Like to me, that's where he started to get really like really good with his performance in terms of his facial expressions and delivery and stuff like that. So he can really perform. You just got to direct him and give him a good script to work with. If you give him a bunch of one-liners that are stupid, of course it's going to come off stupid.
Absolutely. And I think, again, when you look at Chris O'Donnell's career, when you look at Alicia Silverstone's career, never the same. Arnold Schwarzenegger, yes, I know that he was the governor of California. But if you look at his movie career, other than the third Terminator, where are the good Arnold Schwarzenegger movies after this? He made The Sixth Day, End of Days. This was part of his slide as a performer and as an actor. And I think it contributes to the narrative that a lot of careers were just flat out severely damaged by this movie.
Agreed. Except maybe Uma Thurman, I guess.
Well, let's talk about her right now. Before I do that, this is the only film of the original series which none of the villains learn of Bruce Wayne's identity in Batman. In The Joker, Catwoman, they both found out. Riddler and Two-Face found out, but neither Mr. Freeze or Poison Ivy or Bane, who is in this movie, uncovers the identities of Batman, Robin, or Batgirl. I laughed at the Bane thing because I kind of forgot that he was in this movie. Let's talk about Uma Thurman. I think she's really bad in this movie as well. And I don't think all of it is her fault. I think that from a villain perspective, I think that she is given very similar pathos as Selena Kyle. The arcs are very similar. They both start out as glasses-wearing, unkempt, meek women who learn that their bosses are corrupt. Once they learn this, both their bosses try to kill them. The killing scene. Do you want to talk? We have to talk about it because John Glover, who I love, he's in a lot of these Warner Brothers movies. He's been Voices. He's been Lex Luthor in Smallville. He was in Shazam. The death scene where he pushes Pamela Isley and kills her is terrible.
Yeah, it creates a sinkhole that apparently just kind of randomly happens because of the chemicals in the ground, and then she kind of sinks to the bottom of a sinkhole that was never there to begin with. Also noteworthy that both Max Schreck and this guy both shoved Poison Ivy and Catwoman as a ways to kill him, which is just ridiculous because I feel like they're just doing the exact same thing from Batman Returns. And you're right, it's literally the exact same arc as Batman Returns to the point where she gets shoved. Even the boss has crazy hair. It's like it was just like almost frame for frame except just a different setting, and it was totally ridiculous. And also another side note, it might not have been like the fourth movie in a row where the villain figures out it's Batman, but it is the fourth movie in a row where a blonde woman figures out it's Batman inside of Batman's house.
Yes, indeed. And of course, both Catwoman and Poison Ivy are resuscitated by the things that become their motifs. The Alley Cats awaken Kyle to become Catwoman, and plants save Isley, who becomes Poison Ivy. And of course, there is sexual tension involving the protagonist and the antagonist, because apparently that is the only story that they know how to tell. So Uma Thurman, I think her career was damaged. I think you look at movies like Kill Bill, and I think that kind of brought her back a little bit. But I still don't think that Uma Thurman has had the kind of career that I would have expected after Pulp Fiction. And maybe that is an indictment of the way that our female leads are done. But, you know, she was in Be Cool, which is really bad. She was in My Super Ex-Girlfriend, which we will probably have to review at some point. That was really bad. She's just been in a lot of movies that have not been very good. So if she's not in a Tarantino movie, it's really dicey.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't know if like she would have reached any higher than she would have. Like I never saw her as like this big movie star, but I did see like she just kind of fit the role of this movie, and then her career like I never expected much out of it. Like because growing up, like I never watched Pulp Fiction until like way after I saw Batman and Robin, right? So I watched Pulp Fiction and goes, oh, that's probably why they picked her for Batman and Robin as Poison Ivy. But then after that, it's just like, well, I never kind of see her career as like being a megastar. So maybe that I don't know what it says, but like it never felt like she was going to be a megastar. So that she kind of peaked, I would say, around the end of Kill Bill in my eyes.
Interesting. I don't know how I feel about Uma Thurman's career, but I think if I'd watched Pulp Fiction, I would have been like, this person is going to be a star just like Samuel Jackson, and just like I would have said, well, this is going to star John Travolta on his comeback trail, which it did for a few years, and it's just unfortunate. Bane is written to be absolutely nothing, despite what he once did to Batman, which is, of course, break his back in a moment that has been recreated multiple times on film. And I don't know, Bane reminds me of the WWE's Kane in that, especially the early iteration of Kane, in that Bane just says like one or two words and just is a menace. So that's how I always associate the two. And this movie came out the same year that Kane debuted in the WWF.
How weird is that? But yeah, he's also filled up on venom and steroids. That's what Bane is essentially built of. He's a scrawny dude that gets injected with venom and steroids. And as I recall, like a couple years ago, I read an interview from Joel Schumaker saying that his idea of Bane was just like, ooh, steroids and, you know, just big muscles and just blah, blah, blah. And then that's his idea of Bane, and that's what it became. And it just became this nothing character. And at least they gave him the mask, but it's so weird that like he knows how to like drive and take orders. He just randomly takes orders from Poison Ivy for no explanation whatsoever, other than just like he's an idiot because he's a musclehead now, right? Like that's the message. So it's kind of ridiculous. It's also ridiculous seeing Bane drive with his mask on. So yeah, it's just pretty wild. And then when he gets the injections stop, when they pull out the injections at the end of the movie, he just becomes a scrawny little dude again, which I think is physically impossible because that's not how steroids work. So
I cannot justify giving this any points. I'm giving this just a flat zero because the performances are so terrible. The characters are so poorly written. I do not think there is a single redeeming quality to any of the villains in this movie.
you're gonna hate me for this, but I'm gonna give it a two because I saw glimmers of like a potentially good Mr. Freeze in Arnold Schwarzenegger in those little moments, like I mentioned, where you just kind of have this close up on his eyes and he's staring at his wife. That's like the most humanity you're ever gonna get from that in this movie, like from that character. So that at least they gave me that moment, like because that's what I remember from the show and even from the '60s Batman show. Like I still think like that was better than this, but I'll give it a two. I'll stick with that. I can't give it a full one or zero just because I felt like at least they were trying, and and I do like the look of the Mister Freeze suit, but I guess that's more of a technical thing.
And let's get to the story, which I'm giving a 1. I think that the 1 point is the ending conversation with Batman and Mr. Freeze. I think this is the only redeemable scene from the movie. I think there's some good Alfred stuff, but I don't think the scenes themselves necessarily work all that well. But I think what Batman says to Mr. Freeze is powerful, and I think it's unironically good, and then they completely undermine it by having him in Arkham Asylum with Poison Ivy, and he has a neon blue suit. I have no idea why they would let him do that. I think McGregor's is a nice idea, but it's never explained what exactly it is. And if you're going to have this, then you have to at least explain something about it. Mr. Freeze and Ivy's plan is pretty much incompatible, and their alliance makes zero sense. I don't understand how Mr. Freeze is literally going to freeze everything when the sun is out, and you're not going to be able to freeze the whole world at the same time. It doesn't. I'm not. This is a 1. I'm not talking anymore about this.
It's ludicrous. It's pretty goddamn ludicrous, is what it is. I'm gonna stick with it too because I love that Alfred subplot that I want them to kind of almost do like again, but like do it like in a really deep, significant way. Like if you would have done that shit with Michael Caine and another Christian Bale Batman, I think you would have pulled on a lot of heartstrings there. So they kind of pulled on some in Dark Knight Rises with that one scene in the hallway, but yeah, and I just I do like that they brought in the wife and they made it sympathetic. And you're right, that scene at the end was actually pretty decent when he said even when he said take two and call me in the morning, I was like, okay, that's funny. I give it that. So I'll stick with my two again. Like I would have give like ones honestly, but I just feel like there's these glimmering shimmers of like hope that kind of stick out, like these little moments with the subplots and stuff like that. So I'll give it a two.
I definitely think it's there, but I don't think it's there enough for me to justify giving it anything higher than the scores I'm giving it. And the technical, I think this is technically one of the worst superhero movies that has ever been made, and I'm giving this a big fat 0 as well. I think the costumes are awful, and again, it has nothing to do with the bat nipples and the cod pieces. You get the same repetitive score as the previous movie. Gotham literally looks like a cartoon most of the time. The editing of this movie is a mess. The visual effects don't hold up. There's a clear editing mistake when Robin gets his head dunked in water. It looks like the footage repeats itself. And I just think for the opening scene alone with the skating around, this movie, it's a complete mess. It feels worse in some cases than even the 1966 Batman.
It does, and that scene in the beginning you're talking about, they're playing hockey with a diamond. So let's picture that, people. Batman and Robin playing hockey with a diamond. That's the start of this movie. So I'm giving it a 1 on the technical side. The score is just like they're taking these themes that Danny Elfman, created originally and just throwing them in a loop and then adding all this extra shit that doesn't even sound like a Batman movie. So that's terrible. The bat suit's fine. That stuff's fine. It's what we have. It's what we saw before in the previous movies. I'm not a fan of the Poison Ivy look. I just something too cartoonish for me in that. And then the straight up green jumpsuit at the end didn't look good at all. The one thing I did like is Mr. Freeze's suit. And I don't know what it is, but that just, to me, even when as a kid, I see the suit now, I thought, okay, that's pretty creative. They thought of a lot of like compartments on this thing. It's kind of like a Buzz Lightyear kind of suit. You know what I mean? But I accept it because Mr. Freeze needs to be cooled all the time, so you need a suit that needs all those little, hydraulics and cooling systems in it, so it makes sense. So Mr. Freeze's suit I thought was the only thing that kind of looked good. So I'm going to give it a 1, but everything else is just terrible. And, I think what's even worse is like the soundtrack, the songs that they pick, you can't even hear them in the movie because they hardly even play them, and that's going to go with my legacy score in a second.
So the legacy, Brian, this is going to take me a minute, so please bear with me. I think this movie is an abomination. I think it killed the franchise dead to the point where they took a risk on Christopher Nolan and a completely different vision of this franchise. I think it significantly damaged the career of almost everybody in this movie, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, Uma Thurman, Chris O'Donnell, Alicia Silverstone. I think George Clooney is the only person who came from this relatively unscathed. Joel Schumacher blamed studio pressure to make the film more toyetic, and in the making of documentary, he basically apologizes to disappointed fans. So that should tell you a lot. At one point, Joel Schumacher wanted to do Batman Year One, and after this, it was decided that he would not do this. They decided to not rehire Schumacher, so basically, this significantly damaged his career as well. I don't want to say that this movie killed Bob Kane, but Bob Kane did happen to die 1 year after the film was released. I don't know if that contributes to the legacy score, but I certainly think it's worth pointing out. If not for the universally negative reaction to the film, the fact that this movie did not make a lot of money for Warner Brothers, this killed 2 different sequels. Batman Unchained, a direct sequel, would have had George Clooney and Chris O'Donnell reprising their roles, although there were no plans for Alicia Silverstone to return because sexism. Scarecrow and Harley Quinn would have been the main villains, with cameos from past villains in the series. The film was going to take the film back to its darker roots. The other idea was a Robin Nightwing spin-off, with O'Donnell reprising his role as Dick Grayson. It is speculated that if films beyond Batman Unchained were to be made, O'Donnell would be Nightwing rather than Batman. This also killed Superman Lives. Tim Burton was supposed to make Superman Lives. This is a film that we talked about at the beginning of the year. It was shut down. The movie would have been a first attempt to have a shared universe because George Clooney as Batman and Nicolas Cage as Superman would have interacted. That would have been something else. So that's pretty much it. I give this a big fat 0.
That little tie-in note, they actually mentioned Superman at the beginning of Batman and Robin, so I thought, oh, that's why they mentioned it, because they were going to do a tie-in movie now. That's why he says Superman works alone, blah, 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 at the beginning of the movie. I thought that was a nice little wink-wink to a movie that was never coming anyway, so I'm going to go with a 1. It's kind of weird because, this, like I mentioned, the soundtrack, there's this song on the soundtrack by Smashing Pumpkins, and then the song is it's such a really good, deep, kind of like melodic song that they used it in the trailer for Watchmen, the very first trailer for Watchmen that blew everyone's minds when that came out, because that trailer actually debuted on The Dark Knight. So there's this full circle moment that I always remember with this soundtrack for that song by Smashing Pumpkins that was used on the Watchmen trailer when I saw The Dark Knight that very night. So that's my little tie-in story right there. In terms of the legacy, that's kind of all I kind of see from it, because like you said, it kills a lot of careers. The only other thing that I've noticed is that this is kind of like a graphic design thing that I don't even think you picked up on, but a lot of graphic designers love the Batman and Robin font. And if you look at a lot of fonts, even on indie wrestling posters and everywhere, like, local mom and pop shops doing like, local invitations for people and stuff like that, and printing presses and stuff like that, you'll see the Batman and Robin font. It's very clear as day. And it's almost the same font as Batman Forever, which kind of gets mixed up for the two, but it's one of those things that you'll notice if you start noticing fonts like I do as a graphic designer. So my legacy score is going to be a 1.
All right, my total is a whopping 3.
Mine is an 8.
So the total is 11. If this movie didn't go in the pile of shame, I would have strongly considered not doing this podcast anymore, because this is easily one of the worst movies that's ever been made about superheroes. And I think when you look at DC and their legacy of superhero movies, there's a reason this is the fourth one of these. Catwoman, Green Lantern, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and now this. There's a reason for that. There is a inconsistent quality to a lot of these DC movies, and even when we talk about some of the other DCEU movies, I don't know if they're going to get in the pile of shame, but they're going to be very close. And I think the fundamental difference between Marvel and DC is Marvel, once they got everything in-house, there has been a consistent level of quality, which I think certainly has its negatives, but it certainly has its positives, because if you notice, nothing from the MCU has gotten into our pile of shame.
And nothing relatively comes close, except maybe Iron Man 2, but that's just middle of the road. So it's going to be very difficult, I think, for an MCU movie to get down to this level. But it's just kind of sad, but at the same time, it was a wake up call. You know what I mean? Like, it showed people what not to do, and then it kind of put the franchise dead for what, 2005, so 7 years, 8 years before they started production on Batman Begins. So something like this may be a necessary thing. It's like a wake up call, you know. So they learned from it for sure.
All right, let's get to the burning questions. Numerous careers were destroyed. Who would you give a hall pass so that their career could go on as if this movie never happened? Based on the way I was talking, it should be obvious who my answer is. Alicia Silverstone for me.
Yeah, me too. And like I said, I'm a big Clueless fan. I watch that movie probably once a year kind of thing. And like looking back and like a perfect time capsule of the 90s or whatever. And she's so good at that. And she's decent in this. And I feel like her career would have been fine if she would have picked like different kind of roles and not playing, I don't know. I think she went too quickly from being like this, indie darling to like all of a sudden trying to be pushed as a Hollywood female lead that I don't think she was ready for.
What are 3 things? Normally we ask 1, but in this case, 3 things you would do to make this film better.
No George Clooney. I can't even think. I would probably just pay extra for Val Kilmer to come back because I like him as Bruce Wayne. More of the Alfred subplot and probably take out Poison Ivy.
So we agree on 1. Take out Poison Ivy. That's absolutely the decision that I would make, because then I think you could focus the plot more centered around Arnold Schwarzenegger and possibly Alfred. But actually, my second move is I would replace Arnold Schwarzenegger with Patrick Stewart, pretending that he could still be Xavier in X-Men as well. But I think Patrick Stewart would just be a million times better. I think he would add some of the pathos. So my hot take for this was I was not going to replace Joel Schumacher because I think he gets too much blame. But after watching the behind the scenes with this and looking at the visuals, I am going to replace Joel Schumacher with someone else and just hope that Akiva Goldsman can write a better screenplay. So my 3 changes: take Poison Ivy out, Patrick Stewart as Mr. Freeze, replace Joel Schumacher. I think this movie is a million times better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess I just can't, I don't know. It just feels like even if you took Schumacher out, it's just like I can't picture a director at that time to do this kind of movie and kind of just make it good, because I don't know if there was any directors ready to kind of take on this kind of role, because we didn't know how to do a superhero movie proper, other than, Batman 89 and Superman and everyone trying to recreate that, but everyone failed after that.
Is this the worst superhero movie ever made?
I don't know. I feel like my brain went a little numb when I watched Catwoman. Like I felt like I was Matt Hardy, being deleted or something like that. Like that's when I've actually sat in a movie and just laughed hysterically, because it's like, what the fuck am I watching? I didn't exactly have that moment here, so maybe I'll just stick with Catwoman, and this will still be in the bottom 3, maybe bottom 5.
I think Catwoman is significantly worse than this movie, if you could believe it. I think the visuals alone, it's so bad, and Sharon Stone is so bad. Oof, never speak of that movie again. Is Arnold's performance the worst in the history of superhero movies? Because I say, hell yes, I think this is the worst.
I don't know. It's bad, but I don't know. I found some redeeming qualities in his performance, just because I like him, the way he looks at his wife, and he's desperate to bring her back. But I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I want to say Catwoman again. I even want to say Sharon Stone from that movie, and that counts as well. But it's going to be very difficult. But I can't officially say that it's the...
What is the original Batman franchise's legacy in the context of superhero movies? So not just this movie, but we have come to the end of the first Batman franchise. So let's just assess the whole thing.
to me, it's going to be like the marketing, man, because the Warner Brothers marketing was just lethal. You know what I mean? They really wanted the kids to get in and all the tie-ins. Once they realized that Batman Returns didn't really have that effect, they obviously had to change things up and made them lighter. That's the result we got with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. And to me, like it's just all this marketing stuff and the material stuff. It just encapsulates the '90s in marketing. We still kind of get that today with the Avengers stuff and that being popular with the McDonald's Happy Meal tie-ins and whatnot. But I just the commercials and all the little things, and I collected the toys and all that kind of thing. So it was a big deal for me as a kid in terms of the marketing.
I think what you ended up with is, I think you ended up with one good but flawed movie. I think you ended up with two very polarizing movies. I think there are certainly people who will defend Batman Returns and Batman Forever. And I think you ended up with something that was so historically bad that it killed the franchise and moved superhero filmmaking into something else completely. I think when you look at the first 2 decades of the modern superhero film, which I consider to be 1978, I consider this to be the end point. And then I think we kind of go into the Wild West for a couple of years, and then I think 2000's X-Men is what really starts kind of the next phase, pun not intended, of superhero filmmaking. And I think this is the end point because this movie was just so bad, and we basically went 3 years. And I know that Blade did come out in 1998, and I know that we got Mystery Men in 1999, but really, up until X-Men, we did not get a mainstream film like this that was meant to be big. And even X-Men, the first X-Men was relatively small and had a relatively small budget. So I think the legacy is that the marketing, like you said, I think that there's a lot of mixed bag stuff. I think it also showed that bigger actors could appear in these movies and not have their careers destroyed. And I know what it did to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman, but it certainly enhanced Jack Nicholson and Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones and what it did for their careers. So I think that's kind of where the legacy is. And I think when we talk about The Dark Knight, I think the legacy of that trilogy is going to be significantly different. It'll probably be also more significantly positive. But what we are doing next week is we are taking a break from the franchises, and we are going to kind of a standalone. And it's only standalone because we are not looking at the full Batman animated series. There's like 120 episodes. It's too much to do, but we are going to look at the theatrically released Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which might be my favorite Batman movie of all time. We'll talk more about that next week. And it came out on Christmas Day, 1993.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it didn't make the money that it was expected to. And I didn't even realize this movie came out in theaters, to be honest, until I found it on video years later at the video store. So, and I wasn't even big on the Batman the Animated Series as a kid. I was more into Spider-Man and X-Men. Only until about 10 years ago where I binged the series and realized, like, yeah, this is greatness right here. This is, like, definitive Batman stuff. And then watching the tie-in movie with Mask of the Phantasm really, puts things in perspective and really shows how you can do a Batman movie at the time. But unfortunately, not a lot of people saw it. So we're going to give it some love and kind of shed some light on the whole, I wouldn't say debacle, but just kind of like, mismarketing of the movie. And at the time, I don't think this would have really been a big movie with kids anyway.
I'm not sure, and I think where this movie made its money was on home video after the fact. So I think this movie did make its money back. I think it ultimately has proven to be financially successful, and I think it is very popular among a lot of people. But we will get into that next week. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for withstanding Batman and Robin with us. We will talk to you next week.
This movie can freeze in hell.